Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tonellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I have made it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. This episode is brought to you by Pantera Press.
It's fair to say that Australians have a love affair with rural crime. Think novels by Jane Harper, Chris Hammer and Margaret Hickey, to name but a few. However, there's a subset of this genre, which we might call coastal crime, evoking the small communities we love in fiction and the seaside locations to which so many of us are drawn. And my guest today is a perfect example of an author who has used her upbringing in a small island community as a springboard for a page-turning mystery. Listeners, my name is Cassie Hamer. I'm an author and am delighted to be interviewing fellow author Nicole Crowe about her debut novel, The Washup, a darkly funny suspense novel set on Magnetic Island in Far North Queensland, a truly unique environment of huge granite boulders, excesses of koalas and other unusual wildlife. Nicole, welcome to Talking Aussie Books and congratulations on a terrific book, which from the cover looks like a dark mystery with its deep greens and blacks. But actually, it's a story that offers a lot of very deadpan, typically Australian humour. Was this what you consciously set out to write?
Yes, and let me say thank you for that beautiful introduction. That's really flattering, and thank you for having me. I think it kind of was, in part, what comes natural to me, but also in part what I did sort of want to consciously add to the genre of crime fiction, because I've read a lot of Australian crime fiction, and there was a lot of, the cop characters, and a lot of it's quite hard-boiled, and I thought maybe I'll just see if I can take it in a slightly more wonky, more quirky direction and see how it goes. And so far, so good. And I'm really glad that readers are enjoying it so far.
Yeah, I think it's testament to the fact that even in the midst of tragedy, there are these blackly comic moments. But the other thing that really stood out to me about this book, obviously, is the setting. Now, I've never been to Magnetic Island, but having read your book, I really want to. You grew up there, and I'm wondering if you can paint us a picture of the landscape.
Yeah, so Magnetic Island is about 8 kilometres off the coast of Townsville. So it's unique in the fact that it doesn't have a land bridge. So it is still geographically isolated because you have to take a 20-minute ferry trip to get there. But it is still oddly suburban. It has a couple of small supermarkets. It's got a few pubs. It's got a long-term population of about 1,500 people, but a lot of tourism as well. So it's this real mix of baby boomers who've been living there for their whole lives and young European tourists and people who commute daily to their office jobs in town. So it is quite a strange social mix of people over there. But it's also, the landscape is very striking because it's essentially made up entirely of enormous granite boulders. Some of them are up to 10 stories tall. It is quite spooky at nighttime because of the silhouette of these enormous boulders that are right on the beach, and lots of pine trees just sort of poking out the top of them. So the middle of the island is the mountain, like it's a legit mountain called Mount Cook. And 75% of the island's land surface is national park. So only a tiny fraction of the island is actually populated on the coast. So the middle of the island, nobody knows what's in there. There's all sorts of rumors about what's in the middle of the island, but nobody actually really knows because it's quite difficult to get into the middle of the island to hike because there's a few tracks, but the boulders are so obstructive. Once you get like 20 meters out of the residential part, it's just untouched bush and scrub.
It sounds incredible, and it's a terrific backdrop to a crime novel because there is this constant sense of menace. And you mentioned before the people of the island, and the people in this book as well are really quirky. Eve, who's our main character, she's also grown up on the island, and she definitely feels this sense of otherness. She's had to commute to the mainland for school, where the island kids are sort of regarded as slightly odd. And there's a comment made by one of the other characters in the book that a lot of people move to Magnetic Island because they're running away from something, either that or they don't fit into normal life. Was that how it felt for you growing up on the island?
Yeah. Yep. I mean, my parents moved there with myself and my little brother when I was about 4, and he would have been about 1, because they were both artists. My mum was from Townsville and my dad was from Hobart, and they met in the army during the Vietnam War period. And my dad especially had all sorts of little, jobs. He'd worked for the Council Hobart. He'd worked in kind of higher education. But I mean, being the artist at heart, those positions didn't last very long. And eventually he just went, you know what, screw it. And they moved to Magnetic Island because they'd already knew the place because my mum was from the region. And that's kind of just where we stayed. And then they were just practicing artists for my entire childhood. And there's a lot of artists on Magnetic Island because it's a beautiful, I mean, it's a perfect place to live as an artist, because if you're going to be a painter, it's the perfect landscape to paint, and you can paint it over and over and over again, and it's going to look different every time depending on the light, depending on the time of year, depending on the tides, pre or post cyclone. Everything, the natural environment is always shifting and changing, and just the perfect place to live with, like, inside your art basically. But that's not the normal childhood. That's not the normal life in Australia, particularly suburban Australia. It's completely alien to most people in the capital cities, and even people on the mainland, because I had to take the ferry because there was only one school on the island, and it's a primary school. So once all the kids got to high school, we had to commute every day on the ferry, and it took about, between all the buses that we had to take on the island and in the mainland and the ferry itself, it was about a 3-hour round trip. Most of us went to the catchment school, which was a state school close to the ferry terminal, and we were a minority. The island kids were a minority in that school by a long, long way. And we got called feral daily. And when you're in like grade 8 and 9, it's kind of mean. You get called feral because the kids are being mean. But then as you go through high school and you enter the later years of high school, it becomes almost like a term of endearment. But you still very much understand that your life is different, that your day-to-day is different. And the mainland kids understand that too. So it's that funny conflict of, you're all going to the same school, you're all in the same English class, but there's that difference as well.
I thought it was interesting in the novel that I think one of the characters name checks Julian Assange as being someone who grew up on Magnetic Island. I was really interested by that. So then I did a little bit of online digging and found out that, yeah, in fact, his mum had spent some time on there as a single mum with young Julian. And she'd written a couple of little items, I think in a visitor's book, where Julian's mum said she'd moved to the island and went native, in her words, and was paying $12 a week to rent a cottage on the island. So I think that's testament to what I'm trying to get out there, that sense of otherness and disconnecting from the usual world, I suppose. And there's a real tension, I think, that comes up in the book where Eve definitely does feel like an outsider.
Yes. I guess she's based on me and my experiences, because you know the old adage is write what you know. And so I thought, why not? So when people make obvious comparisons between me and Eve, I just shrug and go, probably.
Well, I can't imagine that it's completely your story, because the story is quite tragic and it's very heightened, I suppose. So let's talk a little bit about what actually happens in the book. As I said, the main character is Eve. She's a school teacher, but she's kind of a hot mess. And she's experienced a fair degree of tragedy in her life. Both parents died in a car accident when they were quite young, in their 60s. And Eve is living back in the family home on Magnetic Island, which she has completely failed to clear out of all her parents' stuff. And that's when her sister Tilly, who's even more of a wild card, I would say, but she's a physio and she's had a string of really terrible boyfriends. But Tilly invites Eve to Townsville for a special evening and a special announcement regarding her new boyfriend, Matt. Now, what's actually going on with Tilly, and what's the announcement she's about to make?
Well, that she's met this new guy and he's a keeper. And Eve is really taken aback because he looks exactly like a young Richard Gere. And Eve is obsessed with Richard Gere, because even though Eve is not in the era that Richard Gere, was making movies, streaming has just given her every single Richard Gere movie ever. And so she's kind of addicted to Richard Gere movies. So then Tilly's new boyfriend looks exactly like Richard Gere. So she's quite floored by that. and also a little bit suspicious because he's a little bit too good looking. So Eve goes to visit her sister, who she hasn't seen for several months because Tilly's kind of gone off the radar, which is something that she does quite frequently. And yeah, and Tilly announces that she's engaged now. So that's also a huge shock to Eve because she's like, I don't know who this guy is. And like, it's a bit too soon, and like, you've moved in together. And then there's a horrible, tragic skydiving crash. And then the narrative really ratchets up a notch because Eve is already slightly paranoid, and she's still grieving the death of her parents in the car crash. And she's an angry griever. She's not crying into her pillow for the entire novel. She's out to avenge whatever the universe has done to her and her family. So she's very angry and she's very paranoid. And so the narrative takes some crazy, surprising turns because Eve is also kind of incapable of getting out of her own way.
Fair to say that for her, the alarm bells are ringing almost from the second that she meets Matt, because as you said, he's kind of too perfect. And it does look from the outside that Tilly is in fact changing herself to be more the woman that he wants her to be. And then sort of to seal the deal for this engagement, Tilly agrees to a tandem skydive because Matt is a skydiver and he thinks it's a great idea. But the catch is that he's not going to skydive with her. He pairs her up with one of his colleagues. That's when the accident happens, and it's just all shades of awful. But it's fair to say that Eve immediately suspects Matt of some kind of foul play because there are just so many flags there for a coercive control kind of a relationship. But I'm interested in the skydiving aspect because it is quite unusual, but it honestly plays into one of my deepest, darkest fears, and that is of skydiving and something going wrong with the parachute. There's quite a lot of technical detail around this, and I'm wondering how you've researched that part of the book.
Well, my brother used to be a tandem master working in Australian and US skydiving. So I'm not a huge fan of research. Like, I could never write historical fiction because I just have to spend too much time in archives, and I'd have to research what people wore in ye olden days and all that kind of stuff. I'm quite lazy with research. So I just thought, well, Clayton was a skydiver for years and he knows. And he would tell me all the crazy stories. And I would see him every now and then wherever he was in the country doing, because skydivers travel around a lot because it's a very seasonal job. And I would meet some of his colleagues, and some of them were like fully off the wall because, naturally, because if you're jumping out of a plane 9 or 10 times a day with a stranger strapped to you for years, there's obviously a certain type of personality that's drawn to that as a job. My brother's more towards the sensible side, but some of his colleagues, I was like, wow, this is a world that is completely outrageous and completely outside my experience. So I thought it would be a really fun field to play with in the crime setting because, yes, there is, it's an adrenaline sport, so there's always potential for something to go wrong. It doesn't happen very often, but I just thought, well, if something did go wrong, then how would that play out?
Have you been skydiving? And if you have, can you tell us what it was like?
I have been skydiving once. I put it off for years because my brother was like, you have to do a skydive with me. We have to do a skydive. And I was so appalled by the idea of strapping myself to my little brother and letting him throw me out of a plane that I was like, oh, well, you're in Perth, so I can't. We're on the other sides of the country, so I can't. And then I was over in Perth for a work thing, and he was really hassling me to, let him take me skydiving. In that typical little brother way, like, oh, come on, it's fine. It's totally safe. Like, I know what I'm doing. I'm a professional. And I was like, I don't want to. But then my mum, she went skydiving with him. So my mum strapped herself to my little brother and jumped out of a plane. And I thought, man, I can't be outdone by my mum. So I had to give in and let him take me skydiving. And I screamed all the way down. I was trying to cling to the sides of the plane because a skydiving plane is like a minivan with wings, and it's got that big minivan door. So basically there's no seats in the back of the plane. You just all cram in there. There's it takes up to 4 or 6 people or something in total, the back of this minivan plane. And then you get up and it's quite nice. The view's beautiful, particularly because this was over Rottnest Island in Perth. So it was absolutely stunning because it takes a while to get up into the right altitude. So I was just looking down going, oh, that's nice. That's nice. Oh, this isn't so bad. And then the door slid open and I started screaming my lungs out. And then I was clinging so hard to the frame. I'm like, no, I'm not, I can't, I'm going to die. And so the skydiver behind us crammed into the back of the minivan, just put his foot on my brother's back and pushed us both out of the plane. And I screamed all the way down. It was unbelievable. It goes against everything, all biology, completely against that. We're not built to drop out of a plane and free fall for 3 minutes. You know, that's not what we're built for. Nothing. No animal is built for that. Birds have wings for a reason. They don't free fall unless they're unless they're an eagle catching a fish or something. So it was ridiculous. I mean, I'm glad that I did it, but it was absolutely harrowing. But lots of people love it. I mean, it's an industry, right? People pay lots of money to strap themselves to a stranger and jump out of a plane. So yeah, the whole concept is just wild. So I thought, I was like, maybe I can pitch this as like Point Break, but without, the skydiving drugs in their backpacks. Because, I haven't seen a skydiving, big sort of blockbuster style skydiving narrative since Point Break. I mean, there's probably a few of them around that I missed, but I thought, why not? I've got the inside track on all the skydiving research information because all I have to do is ring my brother. So, why not have a crack?
Absolutely. You're confirming all my worst fears about skydiving and affirming my decision that it's probably not something that's in my future and how niche of a genre it probably is, because there are so few people who've actually done it. But I'm interested that you mentioned animals, because there's quite a few animals mentioned in your book, that being the wildlife of the island, the snakes, the possums, that Eve actually lets a possum into her bed, which I nearly died reading. There's snakes everywhere. You can't walk anywhere without sort of falling over a koala as well. But there's also a very special dog called Camo. Can you tell us a bit about the doggy?
Yes, the dog is based on a real dog. It was the dog of one of my brother's former bosses. And one night I went out my brother was working a bit north of Townsville. And one night I was staying with him, and we went to the pub with all of his workmates. And so there was this dog under the table. It was a little Jack Russell, and it was cowering under the table at this pub. And I was like, what's wrong with that dog? And my brother's like, that dog's probably got some PTSD because it's done too many skydivings, because the boss attaches it to the front of his chest and jumps out of the plane with it. It's also been involved in a couple of plane crashes. So the dog was permanently in the plane, and it probably had a bit of PTSD. And I was like, what do you mean the dog skydives? What do you mean the dog's been in 2 plane crashes? And then his boss is like, well, only one of those plane crashes was my fault. And I was like, what conversation am I having in this crazy pub? So I thought I have to put the dog in the book, because that's you can't make that up, right?
And the dog is really just one of a cast of some really unusual characters, support characters, I suppose, in the book. There's Maureen, who is a mother of a young guy called Jack, who unfortunately also loses his life in the parachuting accident or skydiving accident. And she's sort of a hippie conspiracy theorist. There's also Bruce, who is the hardware store owner, who has an obsession with capers and making dream catchers. They're so quirky. And I'm wondering how much is based on people that you knew, or is it more of just a general vibe of the kinds of people that you find on the island?
Probably a bit of both. If you're from a small community, you can't take too many details from life. You have to do composite characters, because I don't want to go, because my parents still live over there and I go back to the island frequently. So I don't want to get bailed up in the post office by somebody who recognizes themselves and then wants to pick a bone with me while I'm trying to send a package. So I did have to be careful about, details and making the characters composite characters so that nobody would recognize themselves. But I mean, I really love weird stuff. So I've always got my radar up wherever I am. I've always got my radar up for weird details, weird people. I'm always when I find a weird person, I sort of bring them into my orbit and study them, because I just find the day-to-day life, I mean, honestly, if you look hard enough, it's just weird. People are weird. People do weird things. They have weird ideas. Where do they get these weird ideas? So I've always been fascinated by the absurd and by strangeness, probably because I'm from the island of Magnetic Island, and I was surrounded by that for my entire childhood. So my radar is always buzzing.
I can hear that you have a source of rich material to draw upon, not just from having grown up on the island, but also your family themselves sound like really interesting people. And so I suppose it makes sense that I believe the first manuscript that you wrote was actually a memoir about your life called The Ocean is a Liar. Can you tell me more about that project? Because it sounds like it got a fair bit of interest in the publishing industry.
Yeah, so I did a couple of years ago, I did a PhD in creative writing because I wanted that big block of time to, work on my writing. And so as part of that PhD, I produced a memoir manuscript, which was really fun because I just thought that the people on Magnetic Island in my childhood, apparently, because I didn't realize this until I was a lot older, is apparently quite unusual. So I thought, well, I'll try my hand at memoir writing. That's kind of my baby, that particular manuscript, because it is my personal story as well. But it hasn't been published because a few publishers and agents were very interested in it. They loved the island, they loved the North Queensland vibe, but because the memoir was a collection of kind of humorous short stories, it wasn't the right shape for the publishing sector. I think readers seem to have gone off short stories a little bit at the moment. So it's still in the drawer. It'll probably come out eventually. Maybe I'll reshape it. I don't know. But I mean, it's a really good project. It's still in the back of my mind. So maybe in future, I'll definitely have another look at it.
Sounds like there's something there that hopefully we'll get to see a bit more of at some point. But I'm wondering then, how did you go from memoir writing into crime writing?
I think because I've tried a few genres now. The first genre I was working in was lit fiction because I was reading too much lit fiction. And I thought if you want to be a serious writer, you have to write lit fiction. And I wrote a couple of shocking lit fiction novels because they didn't feel real. They didn't feel authentic. And even as I was writing them, I was thinking to myself, this is shit. Why is this no good? But it's because I was trying too hard, right? I was trying to be Helen Garner or Tim Winton or Peter Carey, and those jobs are already filled. So that's when I switched to memoir, and that I had more success with the memoir, but not quite. And then because I was trying to, well, it was during COVID as well. So I had this memoir that I'd had lots of feedback on, and every agent and publisher said, it's great, but it needs to have a 3-act structure. It needs to have a stronger narrative. So then everything fell apart during COVID, but I had this piece of work that I was trying to get into the right shape. And I spent 2 years banging my head against that wall and I couldn't do it. And then I thought, why is this so hard? It shouldn't be so hard. And then my partner said, well, why don't you just pick a different genre? Obviously, you haven't found the right genre yet. So I thought, well, people really love crime and I love crime. I'm obsessed with every bloody Netflix crime show, So I thought, well, I mean, I like it. I know the structure and it's really fun. And because it's such a broad church crime, you can have your cozy crime, you can have your hard-boiled noir, you can have goth, you can have bloody sci-fi, it can be whatever you want it to be. So I thought, well, then I didn't feel the pressure of, having to be high literary or having to be this or that. You don't have to worry about every sentence sounding like a poem, because crime can be whatever you want. So I found it to be much more of a freeing genre and really fun. And once I got a handle on, some of the plotting convention, I actually felt more liberated because once you get the plotting conventions down, everything else is creativity, right? And once you've made a good plan, I figured out how to plan. That was my big problem. I didn't know how to plan because in lit fiction, the myth is that, it just comes out of you because you're a genius. But it doesn't. That's not true. That's never been true. It's just the gatekeepers that want people to think that that's true so that they can feel like geniuses, I guess. I don't know. So yeah, I've just found crime to be so fun and I feel I can be myself within that genre, whereas I couldn't be myself in lit fiction. And I could be myself in the memoir, but I couldn't get it into the right shape. So I found it really nice to go, so this is what plotting is. And once I figured out the basic structure, then I can do whatever the hell I want with the rest of it. So yeah, so it's not hard-boiled, it's not cozy. My publisher's calling it quirky crime. So yeah, they're comparing it to Deadlock, that show Deadlock, the two Kates from the catering show. Personally, I don't see the comparison is that strong, but I think because the kind of quirky crime thing is a bit new, so there's not a lot to compare my work to at this point, but I'm hoping that more quirky crime novels sort of pop up because it's just the most fun. So yeah, I think does that answer your question?
It sure does. And I'm so glad you referenced Deadlock because I really loved that TV series on the ABC. And it was an example of people who could crack jokes in the midst of horror and tragedy, I
Yeah.
suppose, which
Yeah.
is what your book achieves as well. But I'm interested in this idea that having structure and having a plotting structure can actually be quite freeing. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your planning process and what that looks like. Are you a post-it notes, a flashcards person? Do you have a particular craft book that you like to draw from?
I don't do post-it notes or flashcards. I don't know why. I guess they take up too much space and they're a bit messy. Having come from a childhood full of artists, art is really messy. And so my rebellion was to be like, no, I don't want to be an artist because I don't want my house full of stuff and materials. I want a clean, minimalist laptop screen. So yeah, I did try once Post-its, but it didn't work very well. I don't know why, but I just kind of keep it in my head, and I have plotting documents. So I break down a standard novel is like 80,000 words. So then a chapter should be about 1,500 words. So I break it down into number of chapters, and then I go, well, the midpoint should happen here and the inciting incident should happen here. So I put those big bits in first. So I don't plot intricately. I just put the big events in, and then I start working on it from that. And so there's a lot of flexibility, and my second draft looks totally different to my first draft. But I feel like I really need that beginning structure because then I have something to work towards. I feel like when I write and I don't have a structure, that's when I get really stuck in my head. And that's when I start doing things like obsessing about sentences for half a day, when that's not very productive. And also the beautiful sentence that you write on Monday, on Friday, you might find it doesn't fit the narrative and you have to cut it and you have to kill your darling, and you don't want to do that. So I feel like it's much nicer to be able to have some kind of structure from the very beginning, because then you've got more room to move things around and cut things, and try not to obsess about sentences within the first draft or two. Save that for later and just be really aware about how long it takes to write 80,000 words, and break it down into weeks and try and do the 500 to 1,000 word minimum every day, and then have like a big first draft to work with at the end of that, 6-month period or whatever it ends up being. I have a part-time job, I've got a 5-year-old daughter, and all of that sort of stuff gets in the way. So I have to be quite regimented about my time and how I use it. So being plotting, I feel like saves me a lot of time down the track.
So how does writing fit into your life? Because it's obviously you're busy with work and parenting. So do you set aside particular hours every day? Do you work to a word count?
I do. I always have, because if I didn't do that, I feel like the process of writing a book would take 3 or 4 years. And that's a really long time for one project. So I would really love to get up to the point where I can crank out a book a year and that it's really good. I mean, that's probably a bit optimistic, but you got to have goals or hopes and dreams or whatever you want to call it. So, and I always fall short of them, but it's okay, because any progress is good progress as far as I'm concerned. And when you have a bad day, you just got to let it go, and tomorrow's a new day. All of those cliches are always in my head. They're cliches because they're true. Yeah, so I work part-time. So the days that I don't work and my daughter's at school, I write and I do my word minimum. If I'm not feeling it, I just write bad. It doesn't have to be good. It just has to be on the page. And then when you're in a better mood or you're having a better day, then at least you have something to fix. So you can fix that bad couple of pages, and it's all forward momentum. So, and I'm not very good at working in the evenings, but I try. So I'm quite slow because I have lots of other things in my life, but that's okay. You just keep going.
Not a race, I think is what we probably both have come to understand. But
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, I believe that you have taught creative writing to students, and I'm just wondering, what are the kinds of pieces of advice that you find yourself most often giving to other writers?
Probably the first thing that I tell students is don't write, communicate, because I've always found that when I feel like I'm writing, then I get caught up in sentence structure and little details that are not important in a first draft. So I say, you're not writing, don't worry about commas, don't worry about any of that stuff. When you first, particularly if you're new and you're just starting out, you've never written anything more than 500 words for high school, or you've never written much more than a high school assignment. Creative writing is very different to high school assignments or other university assignments because it's much more free. So when you're in the zone of creative writing, you have to sort of unlearn temporarily all of the conventions that the school system and the university system kind of imposes on you, which is hard. It's very hard. Sentence fragments are fine. And a lot of students can't. It takes them a long time to understand that sentence fragments are okay and your punctuation doesn't have to be good, because it's about communicating your message. It's not about perfect paragraphs. I tell them that every week. I just remind them. And also that a first draft is supposed to be bad, because there is no such thing as the genius. There's like, what is it? Jack Kerouac apparently wrote, was it On the Road, in one sitting on a bunch of toilet paper that he pulled out of a service station. But I don't believe that story for a second. No way. The man is a writer and a bit of a grifter. So obviously he's going to say dramatic stuff like that. And everybody's going to be like, oh, well, the gatekeepers say you're a genius. So obviously you're a genius. And if you want to be a writer and you can't write your magnum opus on the back of a roll of toilet paper while you're drunk in a pub, then obviously you can't do it at all. But no way that story is true. So but that's the myth, right, of the artist and the genius. Every week I'm like, right, your first draft is supposed to be shit. Just write it and hate it, cry, do whatever you need, but just write it and then sit on it for a week and then do it again, but better. And then sit on it for another week. I'm talking about short stories, for undergrad assignments. Yeah, I just say you write your terrible draft, then you give it a week, then you write your terrible second draft, then you give it another week, and then you write your first draft that's okay, and then you submit that. And it'll be really good because it's a process.
It is a process. I once had a very wise writing teacher who said that all writing is rewriting. And I think that that's so true. Your first draft is that you're telling yourself a story, and then your second draft is about making it prettier and making it more palatable, I suppose, to the reader, I think. But tell me, it seems like you've really embraced the crime genre. Is this where you plan to continue, or what do you think will be next for you, Nicole?
Well, I'm halfway through a second novel. It's not going to be a sequel, but it's still set in the region. It's set in Townsville because, like I said, I'm lazy and I don't want to do research. So I'm just going to set all my stuff in North Queensland. And, I live here and I know how the people up here think and I know how they talk. So I quite enjoy putting all that down on paper. And if readers down south love it, then bonus. So yeah, so I'm halfway through the next one. I think it's better than this one. I shouldn't say that, but I feel like I feel really good about it. I feel like it's shaping up really well. And I've learned a lot from the process of writing and publishing the Washup, that I now have all of these other fantastic lessons to apply to my future work. So I'm hoping to have the first draft of this new one finished by the end of the year, and then all of the painful drafting, everything else, the whole process. So yeah, I'm really excited about the next one. It is still in crime because
as well.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just getting a really strong handle on the genre and the conventions and what you can do with it. So I want to explore that to whatever path it takes me, wherever it ends up. And I intend to get weirder because I love the weird. I felt a little bit, there was a few times in this when I was writing the Washup where I felt like some scenes I thought, God, is this too far? Is this pushing it? And a few scenes the publisher did, or a few jokes, they were like, oh, that's a bit on the nose. You should probably take that out. But the feedback that I've gotten from particularly some of the stuff that I thought was probably a bit too off the wall, readers have really enjoyed it. So I'm like, well, then I'm just going to run with this as far as I can take it. So I intend to definitely get weirder in future. And just because it's fun to be weird.
It's fun and it's important to take risks. And I think, like you say, readers really respond to that and enjoy it. And look, if it does cross a line, that's what editors are there for. So I'm delighted to hear that you're going to pursue the vein of setting your stories in such an interesting environment and with characters that are unusual but also feel real. So Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today on Talking Aussie Books, and I can't wait to read the next one.
Thank you so much, Cassie. What a pleasure.
That's it for this episode, folks. Hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If so, I'd love it if you'd leave a review on your preferred listening platform, which may include Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Until next time, friends, happy reading.